Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tabletop Almanac. My name is Simon, and today we are reviewing Basic Roleplaying from Chaosium. Now, you might have seen this some time ago. There was a version that existed that looked a lot like this. The Big Gold Book. It was a compilation of all the rules from the previous games that used the basic role-playing system. It was a great, big, thick book full of great stuff, and has now been changed into the version that we are talking about today, which looks a little more like this, and is currently available in PDF at chaosium.com and drivethrurpg.com. The product itself is a re-release of those rules. They redone the art, layout. As far as I can tell, not changed the text, but I didn't do a side-by-side read, so I could be worked on that. This version is, however, officially part of the orc license, so you are able to use the system in your games as long as the proper credits and verification are given to whatever is required for license. So that's fun. What is it? What is Basic Roleplaying? I've mentioned before on both my blog and other places around the internet that, of course, like many people, my first game was D&D. And while I enjoyed it, there was a ton of fun then. There's a part of me that regrets not using or playing one of the other early games, something like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Call of Cthulhu, or RuneQuest. And part of that is I really enjoy the basic system that is used in Basic Roleplaying. It's a percentile-based, skill-based system where you roll a D100 and try to get equal or below your rating in a particular skill or ability. And that determines, along with the specifics of your role, how well you succeed, and if you succeed. And it's very simple, it's very straightforward. You can look at it and say, oh, I have this great chance of succeeding, though that maybe isn't all that different than looking at a d20 and multiplying it by 5, but nevertheless, it's straight up, it's 60%, 23%, 99% chance to succeed in whatever you're attempting. And because it's not an archetype class-based system, there's no restrictions on who can attempt what. And, you know, a lot of games that do use those still will let you attempt whatever you want to do. But the difference I sort of feel in BRP-based games versus others is you just need to have, as a GM, the players say, I'd like to try this, and then you just say, well, you're rolling against that skill. Done. Simple. There's nothing flashy or fancy about it. It's just straight up that. And they can look at it and decide if they think it's worth the risk or not. Whereas I don't feel that is always 100% evident in the more archetype F20 kind of games, because they also sort of focus on the specific abilities of the character based on their race, ancestry, species, and class. So here it's sort of a holistic person rather than somebody made up of a bunch of different things. To each their own, but I just tend to prefer this sort of approach at a game. When I discovered eBay in my teens, I got a stab at RuneQuest 3rd edition and did quite like it, though it took me a long time to find any info on Glorantha itself, which was part of what sort of sold me on the idea. RuneQuest 3rd edition was Avalon Hill's edition that had a Mythic Earth setting, which, to be honest, I actually really liked, and still quite like. I had a copy of the Big Gold Book rulebook, the one I showed you already on here, and tended not to use it in favor of a different BRP-derived system. I have parted ways with that system, and now find it worth my time to look into BRP again and see what I can find and what I like. There were very specific things I liked about that other system, and whether or not this one presents it, because it's not the same thing at all, remains to be fully seen. There are a few maybe occasional points of confusion in the book if you were coming to role-playing games for the very first time, and it's not necessarily the sort of set of rules I would recommend anyone immediately pick up and dive into if it's your first game ever, and that's only because it has everything, and not everything is scaled with each other. You might be coming in expecting balance. There's not necessarily balance. In fact, over the arc of a game using BRP, balance goes way out the window, and you're never going to see it again. The rules are clear, and they're presented very well, and then there are a ton of additional rules, and that's sort of where I think that stumbling block might come in, is trying to decide what you're going to use. It's not like something like GURPS, or maybe Sword of Hero, but let's stick with GURPS, where you've got the basic book and then you've got a whole bunch of add-on stuff, and you can sort of trust that you can cobble together the game you want by taking the core book plus supers plus magic, and then you can have your super magic fantasy world, and everything is presented there for you. Here you've got a bunch of things you've got to look at and decide really what you want to use and what expresses the setting as you envision it. So there's a little more thought, a little more work to be done in putting it together. And do you want basic magic or do you want sorcery? Well, you know, you'll have to play with it to really kind of figure it out. But it isn't unfriendly to the newcomer, as I've hopefully expressed in the basic idea of the system. So I'm a little torn whether or not I would fully recommend a complete newcomer pick it up. But, you know, at the very least, you know, give D&D a couple of tries and then switch over to it. And watch this review so you can be forewarned. It is still an older system. It has a clear game master and distinct player characters. You're not going to have baked into the system as many situations where players have the same level of narrative control as in something like Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse, Cortex, other games like that. Right? It's a very traditional back and forth. It doesn't mean you aren't collaborating. That's up to you, but it's not inherently part of the system. Again, I mean, that's something I like. I don't really care one or the other, but you know, heads up. So the book itself starts with a history of BRP, Basic Roleplaying, and the various Chaosium games, so RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu, Superworld, etc. This is not an unuseful section. In fact, I would say it's actually a very useful section. One of the things I've noticed very frequently is when you get a massively new influx of players, as we have with role-playing entering the zeitgeist to the extent that it has broken into it, and there's a lack of knowledge of the history of something and how role-playing games have changed over time. What things were like. It's a situation where, you know, how do I do horror in D&D? Like, well, have you tried Call of Cthulhu? And people get annoyed because they ask for D&D and you told them to play a different game. But this is one of those chapters which really helps explain all of that and, you know, break it down in an accessible location. But it's not critical to understanding the game as a whole and the rules of it. but it's a nice little tidbit. It's like on Drive-Thru RPG when there's the excerpts from the history of role-playing in D&D in many of the Wizards of the Coast product pages, where I learned a lot more about the background behind some of these supplements and rulebooks that I just simply never knew. So, to me, it's kind of fun. But. So, the default method of character generation in BRP is through random die rolling. I like it. It's not for everybody, and because of that, there are plenty of optional rules that let you customize this section, like point buy, and then just distribute the points into your characteristics. Again, nothing wrong with that. I like the randomness, but you may not. And one of the things that will probably be pretty common as we go through this is I'm going to say, this is what they have as the default, here are a ton of optional rules. And I'd sort of forgotten how many optional rules there are. And that works to my advantage this time, in the sense of that it's highlighting something that I'm going to like about BRP. One of the things that I do really like in their choice of attributes is size. It is a factor in your hit points, it's a factor in your damage modifier, and also the power characteristic. The attributes are called characteristics. You've got strength, dexterity, size, power, etc. And power is an intangible qualifier of somebody's sort of willpower, spiritual presence, and magical aptitude. It's not charisma. Charisma is still social magnetism and presence. Power is sort of your connection to the current of it all, and it will determine how many magic points you have that allow you to cast spells or use other abilities. Each of your characteristics are then multiplied by 5 to get a target number for when you have to make a characteristic roll because you don't have a skill roll or no skill, sorry, you don't have a skill valid for a particular challenge, or it's simply more suitable to test a characteristic rather than a skill. Alright, easy enough. Quick calculation and right there in your character sheet. You could say, why don't you just do that, but it doesn't quite work that way because you sort of do still need your characteristics as these 3d6 or 2d6 plus 6 generated numbers because of how they integrate with a number of other factors in BRP. There are, as I mentioned, there are tons of optional rules. Some of them I actually assumed were fixed, but they're not in this book at least. That might be true for the Game of Origin, but some of what these things include are fatigue rules, hit points by location, standard points, though that term may be a little outdated, and one of the things I really like is an optional rule where the skill bonus is derived from your characteristics. So you do a quick calculation involving a couple of characteristics, and that gives you a bonus or penalty to different skill groups. So things like manipulation or athletic-based skills are going to be modified by a number of your characteristics, not just one. So, and in negative ways sometimes, like skills focused on agility or nimbleness are negatively impacted by your size, which is kind of cool. I've come to very much enjoy the idea of multiple characteristics affecting your ability to do things. In the Dark Eye, it's a slight digression. You roll three dice to test against 3 different, or a combination of 3 different attributes in order to succeed. Your balance might be dexterity, agility, and strength, and you test against all of them. And this is kind of fun. It's very flavorful. It helps kind of put things in your head as to how every part of your character works together. You'll also do things like determine your age, which helps determine the number of skill points you get to allocate, your personality, if you want to use that, will provide more skill points for various relevant areas. So based on the personality type, certain skills are available to be raised. And then you'll choose profession, which gives you more skill points to assign it, again, relevant areas. After doing a few more things, your character is completed. It's implied all characters are human, or if they're a different species, there's no sufficient reason for it to be mechanically different. One of the easiest ways, it seems, well, easiest, but maybe in quotes, but easiest way to create different species is by taking the mutations power as one of the elements of your setting, because those will let you do things like account for greater size, prehensile limbs, flight, and so on. I have one little beef in this section. Professions is pretty expansive. It covers most anything you might want, or you can easily tweak them and rename them into something else. The absolute least, they give you a very good framework to create your own professions. And if you're building your own setting, I would encourage, modifying them to suit it best. The one part where I'm a little disappointed is that there's a tribesperson profession, and I don't get it. I don't like that they're described as primitive, because it's a crap term these days. Well, it's always been a crap term, but more conscious of how crap a term it is, and how highly outdated and erroneous it is. It doesn't really work as a descriptor of anything. But also, I don't really get what tribesperson is supposed to mean. So the way it's described seems to just be somebody who lives in a tribe, but you don't have, like, citizen of a city or a villager as another profession. So, I mean, maybe the idea is to sort of have the generic person that might belong to a quote-unquote barbarian culture, and that's what it's supposed to mean. But again, I don't see that as being relevant, or at least qualifying as a profession, especially when you have more accurate ones like craftsperson and so on. Well, okay, what do you do in the tribe? I do this. Okay, well, that's a profession, not that you're a part of a tribe. Anyway, powers. So powers are one of those areas where you're going to need to do a little bit of tweaking, take some time, trial and error, see what works for you. There are 5 different rules for powers, and they can be mixed and matched if you want. You don't have to. You probably might not want to. But they are basic magic, sorcery, psychic powers, mutations, and superpowers. These are all from previous Chaosium games, and they are also different ways to achieve the same sort of idea. You might mix sorcery and superpowers in a game, so you get your Doctor Stranges next to your Iron Mans, or Iron Men, but you don't, of course, have to do that. Basic magic treats spells as skills, which I believe is coming from RuneQuest. It's magic at a fine detail level, where you use power points / magic points to cast spells. You have a grimoire, you have a wizard staff. It's a very approachable way of handling magic in an RPG. It's one that most people will probably be very comfortable using, and isn't all that different from core BRP. Anyway, I could see it being used in low-key urban fantasy, historical fantasy, ubiquitous magic, but not massively powerful magic, fantasy, etc. And sorcery, which is the other magic, is a bigger deal. Spells don't need a roll. You instead roll on something called the resistance table to determine if it takes effect. The resistance table is a classic part of BRP. It's a way of cross-referencing your active characteristic against your target's either active or passive characteristic, which then grants you a target number to roll against. It seems like a shortcut to avoid having both parties roll, and so you can just take care of it in one throw of the dice. Sorcery spells are a little grander than basic magic. This comes from Elric/Thornbringer, if I'm not mistaken, where you're dealing with summoning demons, summoning elemental princes, maybe agents of law. I don't know for sure if you did or not. I still regret not picking up Stormbringer 5 when I had the chance. Anyway, after these magic ones, you've got mutations. I'm going to go in order of how it's presented in the book. Mutations are individual powers or abilities. That can be advantages, and then they can be flaws if they're detrimental to your character. These work well for a superhero game, and as I mentioned before, can help you create new species for your PCs. If you're going to do that, then you'll have to have either humans that get mutations or allow all your human characters to get magic or psychic powers or something like that in order to, and this is the first time I'm saying this with some degree of confidence, balance the characters against each other. It's just a way to make sure that nobody feels like so-and-so has a greater advantage mechanically than they do. Mutations include things like bioluminescence, or they affect your movement and ambulatory nature, like bipedal or quadruped. So you could create a centaur, or you could create a glowing centaur if you want. Psychic powers are similar to basic magic, where every power is a skill that can be improved upon, like every other skill. They're just a little more psychic themed. So, Mind Blast, Levitation, it's sort of more that it's just a different flavor to these. Again, though, it doesn't include things like your wizard's staff and grimoire and those. It is, again, much more sort of workman-like. And then you have superpowers. I never thought that a percentile system was always the greatest one for superpowers. I knew Superworld existed and was pretty popular. It was the basis for George Martin's Wildcards universe. It's the one he used to run it, and well, he and whoever else ran those games. But it provides the same sort of power scaling and sort of power widening options that you have in pretty much every superhero game. So there's simply no reason why you shouldn't expect it to work well. There's a really suitable number of starting powers. You can probably easily sort of fix in some of the other powers in this game to sort of round out your power set and fit everything thematically. You can, again, have superpowers and sorcery in a game, or psychic powers. There's no reason you can't. So it seems to be a very sufficient way of handling superpower games. They're not all encompassing, like I said, so maybe some homebrewing will be necessary. It's not GURPS. It is not Hero. But it still does a pretty thorough job as a generic system. Okay, so now how does BRP actually work? I've talked about being a percentile-based system where you'll roll D100, either as two 10-sided dice with one as 10s, one as 1s, or a D100 die if you have it. You want to get equal to or lower your skill or attribute rating. Certain rolls result in a critical success or failure, and that's usually the lowest possible roll or the highest one. I have read in places that my previously stated sense of comfort with knowing I have a 63% chance to succeed is sort of a false friend, and that I don't actually have that percentage when I roll the dice, but I'm not a statistician and I'm not a math person, so I don't fully know. But I like seeing it and trusting what I see. The resistance rule table that I mentioned in the powers section is a shorthand method to handle opposed rules. You can compare anything here to get a target number. You could compare PowerPoints, you could compare two skills. It sort of, but not quite, reminds me of the old DC Heroes system, which worked with abstract point values, which were then referenced against each other. So Green Arrow could shoot an arrow against somebody's force field, and those would be the things that were the determining factors and rolled against. But like many areas in this book, there are optional rules too, which do have my preferred method of opposed rules. Each actor rolls, and the highest one that still succeeds is the winner. It's like the Price is Right method, or the blackjack method. Your skill rating is still very important. So even if you both roll low, you still can succeed by rolling higher. You get a better chance to succeed. Anyway, it's the way I would prefer to do it, and it's how it was done in my previously favored system. Combat is pretty precise and can be pretty nasty. It's opposed rolls of attack versus parry. A successful roll hits, you determine the hit location, reduce the damage rolled by that location's armor points, and then apply the points of damage. There are a few more steps than in some other games, but it really does make it a fun, visceral, blow-by-blow kind of combat, and makes it important to think about a fight before you get into it. If you're using the hit points by location optional rule, then it's even better, because you can wind up being in a situation where you can just take someone's arm off. If you're a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay fan, then you might enjoy that, doing it that way. There are a couple of other rule systems that I'd like to draw some attention to that I think are noteworthy and I do like. Aging. So as your character gets older, attributes will be reduced. If you start old, you've got more points to spend on skills because you've been around longer. So it does kind of balance things out. And the other one is character improvement. And boy, oh boy, do I love how this works. And you don't get experience points. And you don't have levels. If you successfully make a skill check, then you tick a little box next to it. And at the end of the adventure, you roll against the skill. And if you're successful, it increases. And if you're unsuccessful, it still increases, but only by a little. I first saw this in RuneQuest, and I just think it's such a beautifully organic way of advancing characters in a game. If you're a fan of Elder Scrolls, Dungeon Siege, and things like that, you'll like how this works. One of the things I do especially like about it is it means that characters will get better in the skills that they have to use in the course of play. And that means that it'll be easier for people with lower levels to, sort of hit the middle of the curve as it goes along. And eventually catch up to the combat monsters. Well, maybe not fully catch up, but still be able to hold their own, even if they spend their points on other things elsewhere in the game. Or if it's a highly social game, then, the San Dimas High School football rules character can learn and become more eloquent and a better speaker over time through practice. So, that, one of my favorite. There are a lot of other spot rules here. Think for things like auto-fire, disengage, some specifically combat ones, but then some non-combat ones as well. It's really just to cover as many eventualities as possible without leaving you in a situation where you might be having to make a snap judgment and not fully be comfortable in your decision making. The bestiary is not like huge, but there are plenty of opponents, I guess, in there that can be used as templates for other ones, or even altered slightly to create a new version of them. And they use the same rules as player characters, and that's why. So they get characteristics, they have skills, they have powers. In many ways, they can also be substituted as player character options, if you want, because everything is based off the same system, so they're built the same way. Not in a clunky way that creates a whole ton of bookkeeping. Nope, it's pretty straightforward. So it's easy enough to make your own creatures, make your own monsters or whatnot through using this or through tweaking what's already there. Equipment and gear covers, again, most everything you want. Yeah, at the very least at the basic level. Again, I'm not thrilled at the use of the word primitive to describe some tools. I do understand that at the time it was referring to that in a technological sense, but there are other titles that could be used for it, other words, maybe prehistoric, or just don't call it primitive, period. It still kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. The game mastering section. So it doesn't have some of what you might expect out of modern games, like safety tools and so on, because the text hasn't changed, and those being included in games is more of a recent thing. What you do get is a set of very efficient guidelines for being a game master, for teaching rules, for playing in different historical eras or genres, not in great detail, in which case I would expect, if they'd enhanced or added to it for this publication, that you might throw in some safety tools and so on when you're talking about horror. But there's enough to sort of establish yourself in the setting, and you can always grab a safety tool product that's specifically just on that subject elsewhere. Everything in that section is useful. There's nothing extraneous. That's really tight in what it talks about. So that's like an overview of the Basic Role-Playing book. I'm actually quite much more intrigued and much more eager to use it than I had originally thought I would be. I was very sort of set on the other iteration of it that I liked so much. But the optional sections really sort of help balance that out and hit some of the same points as I wanted. There's a lot of product out from the Gold Book era, and you can find things like Western sci-fi adventures, sort of strange fantasy ones. There's a setting called The Green, which is one massive forest, which I've always really wanted to take a look at because it sounds kind of cool. And you could also, I think you can just find it in PDF now, but Magic World was a sort of stripped down version of this that was meant to be a much more generic version of Stormbringer and Elric, and does have something that I want to highlight that I really like. The way it handles its cultures and the terms it uses are descriptions of their societal structure. So like band or state and it isn't sort of describing a technological pole, and doesn't contain any really like loaded or inappropriate terminology. So it's worth checking out. You can find it on DriveThruRPG for not all that much. I would give it a look at the very least. It'd be a very good intro to basic role playing via the fantasy genre. Overall, I think it's an excellent set of generic rules to use for your game. If you like granular, modular, and percentile based games, you can use it for horror. As we know with Call of Cthulhu, you can use it for high drama, swords and sorcery, urban fantasy, historical epics, and again with the Orc license, it's a very good time to look at it if you want to use it for your own publication, or if you just want to be ready for when other people put stuff out. BRP players don't seem to be a ton, or at least I don't know how many new ones are being made every day, but they're very devoted and they always like seeing new content being produced. So definitely keep an eye on it and check it out. It's a solid rule set. I like it a lot. My quibble will only be those couple things I mentioned. So, Basic Roleplaying, a universal game engine from Chaosium. Check it out at chaosium.com or drivethrurpg.com. It's certainly something I'm looking into for my own games and even my own design purposes. So, I would say that's a recommendation. So, thank you for joining me. My name is Simon. This was the Tabletop Almanac, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe out there.